Okay, I'm live. I have my book here. This is the book that I'm going to be highlighting and reading along with as I play the audiobook. I have the audiobook on screen. I was looking for some guided questions. I didn't find any guided questions by chapter. I just found guided questions, I guess, for like the overall book. So at the end of like, I guess, an hour and a half of the audiobook or an hour, I will see if any of those questions apply to anything we just listened to. And yeah, I did prepare a little introduction because I needed to research what parable of the talents even meant. I watched like two short YouTube videos on it. So parable, the word parable, I guess, is like stories from Jesus or God. And these stories are, there's so many names, I guess. Like parable of the talents, parable of the sower. It's like the parable is the story. And apparently, the parable of the talents is there's a person who gives his servants talents, and then he comes back to see what they've done with the talents, I guess is the gist. Um, so it's inspired by like Christianity, the title of it all. So I will play a little bit of this introduction because it gives uh, um, about what we're about to listen to. So, yeah, I think without further ado, I can start. I am ready. I hope you all are ready too. Okay. I'm going to go about right here. Hopefully, everything is easy to hear.
By Recorded Books, producer and publisher of Griot Audio. Lauren Olamina's love is divided among her young daughter, her community, and the revelation that led Lauren to found a new faith that teaches God is change. But in the wake of environmental and economic chaos, Lauren must either sacrifice her child and her followers or forsake the religion that can transform human destiny. And now, Parable of the Talents.
Prologue. From Earthseed, The Books of the Living, by Lauren Oya Olamina. Here we are. Energy, mass, life shaping life, mind shaping mind, God shaping God. Consider, we are born not with purpose, but with potential.
They'll make a god of her. I think that would please her if she could know about it. In spite of all her protests and denials, she always needed devoted, obedient followers, disciples, who would listen to her and believe everything she told them. And she needed large events to manipulate. All gods seem to need these things. Her legal name was Lauren Oya Olamina Benkole. To those who loved her or hated her, she was simply Olamina. She was my biological mother. She is dead. I have wanted to love her and to believe that what happened between her and me wasn't her fault. I've wanted that, but instead I've hated her, feared her, needed her. I've never trusted her, though, never understood how she could be the way she was, so focused and yet so misguided, there for all the world, but never there for me. I still don't understand, and now that she's dead, I'm not even sure I ever will. But I must try because I need to understand myself, and she is part of me. I wish that she weren't, but she is. In order for me to understand who I am, I must begin to understand who she was. That is my reason for writing and assembling this book. It has always been my way to sort through my feelings by writing. She and I had that in common. And along with the need to write, she also developed a need to draw. If she had been born in a saner time, she might have become a writer as I have, or an artist. I've gathered a few of her drawings, although she gave most of these away during her lifetime, and I have copies of all that was saved of her writings. Even some of her early paper notebooks have been copied to disc or crystal and saved. She had a habit, during her youth, of hiding caches of food, money, and weaponry in out-of-the-way places or with trusted people, and being able to go straight back to these years later. These saved her life several times, and also they saved her words, her journals, and notes in my father's writings. She managed to badger him into writing a little. He wrote well, although he didn't like doing it. I'm glad she badgered him. I'm glad to have known him, at least through his writing. I wonder why I'm not glad to have known her through hers. God is change, my mother believed. That was what she said in the first of her verses in Earthseed, the first book of the living. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. The words are harmless, I suppose, and metaphorically true. At least she began with some species of truth. And now she's touched me one last time with her memories, her life, and her damned earth seed.
2032. From Earthseed, the books of the living. We give our dead to the orchards and the groves. We give our dead to life. Chapter 1. From Earthseed, the books of the living. Darkness gives shape to the light, as light shapes the darkness. Death gives shape to life, as life shapes death. The universe and God share this wholeness, each defining the other. God gives shape to the universe, as the universe shapes God.
From Memories of Other Worlds by Taylor Franklin Bankole. I have read that the period of upheaval that journalists have begun to refer to as the apocalypse, or more commonly, more bitterly, the pox, lasted from 2015 through 2030, a decade and a half of chaos. This is untrue. The pox has been a much longer torment. It began well before 2015, perhaps even before the turn of the millennium. It has not ended. I have also read that the pox was caused by accidentally coinciding climatic, economic, and sociological crises. It would be more honest to say that the pox was caused by our own refusal to deal with obvious problems in those areas. We caused the problems. Then we sat and watched as they grew into crises. I have heard people deny this, but I was born in 1970. I have seen enough to know that it is true. I have watched education become more a privilege of the rich than the basic necessity that it must be if civilized society is to survive. I have watched as convenience, profit, and inertia excused greater and more dangerous environmental degradation. I have watched poverty, hunger, and disease become inevitable for more and more people. Overall, the pox has had the effect of an installment plan World War III. In fact, there were several small, bloody shooting wars going on around the world during the pox. These were stupid affairs, wastes of life and treasure. They were fought ostensibly to defend against vicious foreign enemies. All too often, they were actually fought because inadequate leaders did not know what else to do. Such leaders knew that they could depend on fear, suspicion, hatred, need, and greed to arouse patriotic support for war. Amid all this, somehow, the United States of America suffered a major non-military defeat. It lost no important war. Yet it did not survive the pox. Perhaps it simply lost sight of what it once intended to be, then blundered aimlessly until it exhausted itself. What is left of it now, what it has become, I do not know.
Taylor Franklin Bankole was my father. From his writings, he seems to have been a thoughtful, somewhat formal man who wound up with my strange, stubborn mother, even though she was almost young enough to be his granddaughter. My mother seems to have loved him, seems to have been happy with him. He and my mother met during the pox when they were both homeless wanderers. But he was a 57-year-old doctor, a family practice physician, and she was an 18-year-old girl. The pox gave them terrible memories in common. Both had seen their neighborhoods destroyed, his in San Diego and hers in Robledo, a suburb of Los Angeles. That seems to have been enough for them. In 2027, they met, liked each other, and got married. I think, reading between the lines of some of my father's writing, that he wanted to take care of this strange young girl that he had found. He wanted to keep her safe from the chaos of the time, safe from the gangs, drugs, slavery, and disease. And of course he was flattered that she wanted him. He was human, and no doubt tired of being alone. His first wife had been dead for about 2 years when they met. He couldn't keep my mother safe, of course. No one could have done that. She had chosen her path long before they met. His mistake was in seeing her as a young girl. She was already a missile, armed and targeted.
From the Journals of Lauren Oya Olamina. Sunday, September 26, 2032. Today is Arrival Day, the 5th anniversary of our establishing a community called Acorn here in the mountains of Humboldt County. In perverse celebration of this, I've just had one of my recurring nightmares. They've become rare in the past few years. Old enemies with familiar nasty habits. I know them. They have such soft, easy beginnings. This one was, at first, a visit to the past, a trip home, a chance to spend time with beloved ghosts. My old home has come back from the ashes. This doesn't surprise me somehow, although I saw it burn years ago. I walked through the rubble that was left of it. Yet here it is, restored and filled with people. All the people I knew as I was growing up. They sit in our front rooms in rows of old metal folding chairs, wooden kitchen and dining room chairs, and plastic stacking chairs. A silent congregation of the scattered and the dead. Church service is already going on, and of course, my father is preaching. He looks as he always has in his church robes, tall, broad, stern, straight, a great black wall of a man with a voice you not only hear, but feel on your skin and in your bones. There's no corner of the meeting rooms that my father cannot reach with that voice. We've never had a sound system, never needed one. I hear and feel that voice again. Yet, how many years has it been since my father vanished? Or rather, how many years since he was killed? He must have been killed. He wasn't the kind of man who would abandon his family, his community, and his church. Back when he vanished, dying by violence was even easier than it is today. Living, on the other hand, was almost impossible. He left home one day to go to his office at the college. He taught his classes by computer and only had to go to the college once a week. But even once a week was too much exposure to danger. He stayed overnight at the college as usual. Early mornings were the safest times for working people to travel. He started for home the next morning and was never seen again. We searched. We even paid for a police search. Nothing did any good. This happened many months before our house burned, before our community was destroyed. I was 17. Now I'm 23, and I'm several hundred miles from that dead place. Yet, all of a sudden, in my dream, things have come right again. I'm at home, and my father is preaching. My stepmother is sitting behind him, and a little to one side at her piano. The congregation of our neighbors sits before him in the large, not quite open area formed by our living room, dining room, and family room. This is a broad L-shaped space into which even more than the usual 30 or 40 people have crammed themselves for Sunday service. These people are too quiet to be a Baptist congregation, or at least they're too quiet to be the Baptist congregation I grew up in. They're here, but somehow not here. They're shadow people, ghosts. Only my own family feels real to me. They're as dead as most of the others, and yet they're alive. My brothers are here, and they look the way they did when I was about 14. Keith, the oldest of them, the worst and the first to die, is only 11. This means Marcus, my favorite brother and always the best looking person in the family, is 10. Ben and Greg, almost as alike as twins, are 8 and 7. We're all sitting in the front row, over near my stepmother so she can keep an eye on us. I'm sitting between Keith and Marcus to keep them from killing each other during the service. When neither of my parents is looking, Keith reaches across me and punches Marcus hard on the thigh. Marcus, younger, smaller, but always stubborn, always tough, punches back. I grab each boy's fist and squeeze. I'm bigger and stronger than both of them, and I've always had strong hands. The boys squirm in pain and try to pull away. After a moment, I let them go. Lesson learned. They let each other alone for at least a minute or two. In my dream, their pain doesn't hurt me the way it always did when we were growing up. Back then, since I was the oldest, I was held responsible for their behavior. I had to control them even though I couldn't escape their pain. My father and stepmother cut me as little slack as possible when it came to my hyperempathy syndrome. They refused to let me be handicapped. I was the oldest kid, and that was that. I had my responsibilities. Nevertheless, I used to feel every damn bruise, cut, and burn that my brothers managed to collect. Each time I saw them hurt, I shared their pain as though I had been injured myself. Even pains they pretended to feel, I did feel. Hyperempathy syndrome is a delusional disorder, after all. There's no telepathy, no magic, no deep spiritual awareness. There's just the neurochemically induced illusion that I feel the pain and pleasure that I see others experiencing. Pleasure is rare, pain is plentiful, and delusional or not, it hurts like hell. So why do I miss it now? What a crazy thing to miss. Not feeling it should be like having a toothache vanish away. I should be surprised and happy. Instead, I'm afraid. A part of me is gone. Not being able to feel my brother's pain is like not being able to hear them when they shout, and I'm afraid. The dream begins to become a nightmare. Without warning, my brother Keith vanishes. He's just gone. He was the first to go, to die, years ago. Now he's vanished again. In his place beside me, there's a tall, beautiful woman, black-brown skinned and slender with long crow-black hair gleaming. She's wearing a soft, silky green dress that flows and twists around her body, wrapping her in some intricate pattern of folds and gathers from neck to feet. She is a stranger. She is my mother. She is the woman in the one picture my father gave me of my biological mother. Keith stole it from my bedroom when he was 9 and I was 12. He wrapped it in an old piece of a plastic tablecloth and buried it in our garden between a row of squashes and a mixed row of corn and beans. Later, he claimed it wasn't his fault that the picture was ruined by water and by being walked on. He only hid it as a joke. How was he supposed to know anything would happen to it? That was Keith. I beat the hell out of him. I hurt myself too, of course, but it was worth it. That was one beating he never told our parents about. But the picture was still ruined. All I had left was the memory of it. And here was that memory, sitting next to me. My mother is tall, taller than I am, taller than most people. She's not pretty. She's beautiful. I don't look like her. I look like my father, which he used to say was a pity. I don't mind. But she is a stunning woman. I stare at her, but she does not turn to look at me. That at least is true to life. She never saw me. As I was born, she died. Before that, for 2 years, she took the popular smart drug of her time. It was a new prescription medicine called Paracetamol, and it was doing wonders for people who had Alzheimer's disease. It stopped the deterioration of their intellectual function and enabled them to make excellent use of whatever memory and thinking ability they had left. It also boosted the performance of ordinary, healthy young people. They read faster, retained more, made more rapid, accurate connections, calculations, and conclusions. As a result, Paracetamol became as popular as coffee among students. And if they meant to compete in any of the highly paid professions, it was as necessary as a knowledge of computers. My mother's drug taking may have helped to kill her. I don't know for sure. My father didn't know either. But I do know that her drug left its unmistakable mark on me, my hyperempathy syndrome. Thanks to the addictive nature of Paracetamol, a few thousand people died trying to break the habit. There were once tens of millions of us. Hyperempaths, we're called, or hyperempathists, or sharers. Those are some of the polite names. And in spite of our vulnerability and our high mortality rate, there are still quite a few of us. I reach out to my mother. No matter what she's done, I want to know her. But she won't look at me. She won't even turn her head. And somehow I can't quite reach her, can't touch her. I try to get up from my chair, but I can't move. My body won't obey me. I can only sit and listen as my father preaches. Now I begin to know what he is saying. He has been an indistinct background rumble until now, but now I hear him reading from the 25th chapter of Matthew, quoting the words of Christ. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several ability, and straightway took his journey. My father loved parables, stories that taught, stories that presented ideas and morals in ways that made pictures in people's minds. He used the ones he found in the Bible, the ones he plucked from history or from folk tales, and of course he used those he saw in his life and the lives of people he knew. He wove stories into his Sunday sermons, his Bible classes, and his computer-delivered history lectures, because he believed stories were so important as teaching tools. I learned to pay more attention to them than I might have otherwise. I could quote the parable that he was reading now, the parable of the talents. I could quote several biblical parables from memory. Maybe that's why I can hear and understand so much now. There is preaching between the bits of the parable, but I can't quite understand it. I hear its rhythms rising and falling, repeating and varying, shouting and whispering. I hear them as I've always heard them, but I can't catch the words, except for the words of the parable. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same and made them another 5 talents. And likewise he that had received 2, he also gained another 2. But he that had received 1 went out and digged in the earth and hid his Lord's money. My father was a great believer in education, hard work, and personal responsibility. Those are our talents, he would say as my brother's eyes glazed over, and even I tried not to sigh. God has given them to us, and he'll judge us according to how we use them. The parable continues. To each of the 2 servants who had traded well and made profit for their Lord, the Lord said, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord." But to the servant who had done nothing with his silver talent, except bury it in the ground to keep it safe, the Lord said harsher words. "Thou wicked and slothful servant," he began. And he ordered his men to take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one who hath shall be given, and he shall have in abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. When my father has said these words, my mother vanishes. I haven't even been able to see her whole face, and now she's gone. I don't understand this. It scares me. I can see now that the other people are vanishing too. Most have already gone. Beloved ghosts. My father is gone. My stepmother calls out to him in Spanish the way she did sometimes when she was excited. "No! How can we live now? They'll break in. They'll kill us all. We must build the wall higher." And she's gone. My brothers are gone. I'm alone. As I was alone that night 5 years ago. The house is ashes and rubble around me. It doesn't burn or crumble or even fade to ashes, but somehow in an instant, it is a ruin open to the night sky. I see stars, a quarter moon, and a streak of light, moving, rising into the sky like some life force escaping. By the light of all 3 of these, I see shadows, large, moving, threatening. I fear these shadows, but I see no way to escape them. The wall is still there, surrounding our neighborhood, looming over me much higher than it ever truly did. So much higher. It was supposed to keep danger out. It failed years ago. Now it fails again. Danger is walled in with me. I want to run, to escape, to hide. But now my own hands, my feet begin to fade away. I hear thunder. I see the streak of light rise higher in the sky, grow brighter. Then I scream. I fall. Too much of my body is gone, vanished away. I can't stay upright, can't catch myself as I fall and fall and fall. I awoke here in my cabin at Acorn, tangled in my blankets, half on and half off my bed. Had I screamed aloud? I didn't know. I never seem to have these nightmares when Bankole is with me, so he can't tell me how much noise I make. It's just as well. His practice already costs him enough sleep, and this night must be worse than most for him. It's 3 a.m. now, but last night, just after dark, some group, some gang perhaps, attacked the Dovetree place just north of us. There were, yesterday at this time, 22 people living at Dovetree. The old man, his wife, and his 2 youngest daughters, his 5 married sons, their wives, and their kids. All of these people are gone except for the 2 youngest wives and the 3 little children they were able to grab as they ran. 2 of the kids are hurt, and one of the women has had a heart attack of all things. Bankole has treated her before. He says she was born with a heart defect that should have been taken care of when she was a baby. But she's only 20, and around the time she was born, her family, like most people, had little or no money. They worked hard themselves and put the strongest of their kids to work at ages 8 or 10. Their daughter's heart problem was always either going to kill her or let her live. It wasn't going to be fixed. Now, it had nearly killed her. Bankole was sleeping, or more likely staying awake, in the clinic room of the school tonight, keeping an eye on her and the 2 injured kids. Thanks to my hyperempathy syndrome, he can't have his clinic here at the house. I pick up enough of other people's pain as things are, and he worries about it. He keeps wanting to give me some stuff that prevents my sharing by keeping me sleepy, slow, and stupid. No thanks. So, I awoke alone, soaked with sweat and unable to get back to sleep. It's been years since I've had such a strong reaction to a dream. As I recall, the last time was 5 years ago, right after we settled here. And it was this same damn dream. I suppose it's come back to me because of the attack on Dovetree. That attack shouldn't have happened. Things have been quieting down over the past few years. There's still crime, of course, robberies, break-ins, abductions for ransom, or the slave trade. Worse, the poor still getting arrested and indentured for indebtedness, vagrancy, loitering, and other crimes. But this thing of raging into a community and killing and burning all that you don't steal seems to have gone out of fashion. I haven't heard of anything like this Dovetree raid for at least 3 years. Granted, the Dovetrees did supply the area with home-distilled whiskey and homegrown marijuana, but they've been doing that since long before we arrived. In fact, they were the best armed farm family in the area because their business was not only illegal, but lucrative. People have tried to rob them before, but only the quick, quiet burglar types have had any success. Until now. I questioned Aubrey, the healthy Dovetree wife, while Bankole was working on her son. He had already told her that the little boy would be all right, and I felt that we had to find out what she knew, no matter how upset she was. Hell, the Dovetree houses are only an hour's walk from here down the old logging road. Whoever hit Dovetree, we could be next on their list. Aubrey told me the attackers wore strange clothing. She and I talked in the main room of the school, a single smoky oil lamp between us on one of the tables. We sat facing one another across the table, Aubrey glancing every now and then at the clinic room where Bankole had cleaned and eased her child's scrapes, burns, and bruises. She said the attackers were men, but they wore belted black tunics, black dresses, she called them, which hung to their thighs. Under these, they wore ordinary pants, either jeans or the kind of camouflage pants that she had seen soldiers wear. They were like soldiers, she said. They sneaked in so quiet. We never saw them until they started shooting at us, then bang! All at once, they hit all our houses. It was like an explosion, maybe 20 or 30 or more guns going off all at just the same time. And that wasn't the way gangs operated. Gangsters would have fired raggedly, not in unison. Then they would have tried to make individual names for themselves, tried to grab the best-looking women or steal the best stuff before their friends could get it. They didn't steal or burn anything until they had beaten us, shot us, Aubrey said. Then they took our fuel and went straight to our fields and burned our crops. After that, they raided the houses and barns. They all wore big white crosses on their chests, crosses like in church. But they killed us. They even shot the kids. Everybody they found, they killed them. I hid with my baby, or they would have shot him and me. Again, she stared toward the clinic room. That killing of children, that was a hell of a thing. Most thugs, except for the worst psychotics, would keep the kids alive for rape and then for sale. And as for the crosses, well, gangsters might wear crosses on chains around their necks. But that wasn't the sort of thing most of their victims would get close enough to notice. And gangsters were unlikely to run around in matching tunics, all sporting white crosses on their chests. This was something new. Or something old. I didn't think of what it might be until after I had let Aubrey go back to the clinic to bed down next to her child. Bankole had given him something to help him sleep. He did the same for her, so I won't be able to ask her anything more until she wakes up later this morning. I couldn't help wondering, though, whether these people, with their crosses, had some connection with my current least favorite presidential candidate, Texas Senator Andrew Steele Jarrett. It sounds like the sort of thing his people might do. A revival of something nasty out of the past. Did the Ku Klux Klan wear crosses as well as burn them? The Nazis wore the swastika, which is a kind of cross, but I don't think they wore it on their chests. There were crosses all over the place during the Inquisition, and before that during the Crusades. So now we have another group that uses crosses and slaughters people. Jared's people could be behind it. Jared insists on being a throwback to some earlier, simpler time. Now does not suit him. Religious tolerance does not suit him. This current state of the country does not suit him. He wants to take us all back to some magical time when everyone believed in the same God, worshiped him in the same way, and understood that their safety in the universe depended on completing the same religious rituals and stomping anyone who was different. There was never such a time in this country. But these days, when more than half the people in the country can't read at all, history is just one more vast unknown to them. Jared's supporters have been known now and then to form mobs and burn people at the stake for being witches. Witches in 2032. A witch, in their view, tends to be a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or in some parts of the country, a Mormon, a Jehovah's Witness, or even a Catholic. A witch may also be an atheist, a cultist, or a well-to-do eccentric. Well-to-do eccentrics often have no protectors or much that's worth stealing. And cultist is a great catch-all term for anyone who fits into no other large category and yet doesn't quite match Jared's version of Christianity. Jared's people have been known to beat or drive out Unitarians, for God's sake. Jared condemns the burnings, but does so in such mild language that his people are free to hear what they want to hear. As for the beatings, the tarring and feathering, and the destruction of heathen houses of devil worship, he has a simple answer. Join us. Our doors are open to every nationality, every race. Leave your sinful past behind and become one of us. Help us to make America great again. He's had notable success with this carrot and stick approach. Join us and thrive, or whatever happens to you as a result of your own sinful stubbornness is your problem. His opponent, Vice President Edward J. Smith, calls him a demagogue, a rabble-rouser, and a hypocrite. Smith is right, of course. But Smith is such a tired, gray shadow of a man. Jared, on the other hand, is a big, handsome, black-haired man with deep, clear blue eyes that seduce people and hold them. He has a voice that's a whole body experience, the way my father's was. In fact, I'm sorry to say, Jared was once a Baptist minister like my father. But he left the Baptists behind years ago to begin his own Christian America denomination. He no longer preaches regular CA sermons at CA churches or on the nets, but he's still recognized as head of the church. It seems inevitable that people who can't read are going to lean more toward judging candidates on the way they look and sound than on what they claim they stand for. Even people who can read and are educated are apt to pay more attention to good looks and seductive lies than they should. And no doubt the new picture ballads on the nets will give Jared an even greater advantage. Jared's people see alcohol and drugs as Satan's tools. Some of his more fanatical followers might very well be the Tunic and Cross gang who destroyed Dovetree. And we are Earthseed. We're that cult, those strange people in the hills, those crazy fools who pray to some kind of god of change. We are also, according to some rumors I've heard, those devil-worshipping hill heathens who take in children, and what do you suppose they do with them? Never mind that the trade in abducted or orphaned children, or children sold by desperate parents, goes on all over the country, and everyone knows it. No matter. The hint that some cult is taking in children for questionable purposes is enough to make some people irrational. That's the kind of rumor that could hurt us even with people who aren't Jared supporters. I've only heard it a couple of times, but it's still scary. At this point, I just hope that the people who hit Dovetree were some new gang, disciplined and frightening, but only after profit. I hope, but I don't believe it. I do suspect that Jared's people had something to do with this, and I think I'd better say so today at Gathering. With Dovetree fresh in everyone's mind, people will be ready to cooperate, have more drills, and scatter more caches of money, food, weapons, records, and valuables. We can fight a gang. We've done that before when we were much less prepared than we are now. But we can't fight Jared. In particular, we can't fight President Jared. President Jared, if this country is mad enough to elect him, could destroy us without even knowing we exist. We are now 59 people, 64 with the Dovetree women and children, if they stay. With numbers like that, we barely do exist. All the more reason, I suppose, for my dream. My talent, going back to the parable of the talents, is Earthseed. And although I haven't buried it in the ground, I have buried it here in these coastal mountains where it can grow at about the same speed as our redwood trees. But what else could I have done? If I had somehow been as good at rabble-rousing as Jared is, then Earthseed might be a big enough movement by now to be a real target. And would that be better? I'm jumping to all kinds of unwarranted conclusions. At least I hope they're unwarranted. Between my horror at what's happened down at Dovetree and my hopes and fears for my own people, I'm upset and at loose ends, and perhaps just imagining things. Chapter 2, From Earthseed, the Books of the Living.
Okay, we've made it to chapter 2. I'll pause for a little break. I need a highlighter that doesn't bleed. So it took about 40 minutes to get to chapter 2. So let's see. It'll probably take an hour. I'm looking at the thing to get to chapter 3. I think I will go ahead and play it until chapter 3, just to have enough context to see where this book is going. I didn't put a link to join, but I will at the end if anybody wants to give their thoughts on what we've heard so far. Hey. Okay, this is a break. Let me put in the chat. Okay, we're going to continue to chapter 2 right now.
Chaos is God's most dangerous face. Amorphous, roiling, hungry. Shape chaos. Shape God. Act. Alter the speed or the direction of change. Vary the scope of change. Recombine the seeds of change. Transmute the impact of change. Seize change. Use it. Adapt and grow.
The original 13 settlers of Acorn, and thus the original 13 members of Earthseed, were my mother, of course, and Harry Balter, and Zara Moss, who were also refugees from my mother's home neighborhood in Robledo. There was Travis, Natividad, and Dominic Douglas, a young family who became my mother's first highway converts. She met them as both groups walked through Santa Barbara, California. She liked their looks, recognized their dangerous vulnerability. Dominic was only a few months old at the time, and convinced them to walk with Harry, Zara, and her in their long trek north where they all hoped to find better lives. Next came Allison Gilchrist and her sister Jillian, Allie and Jill. But Jill was killed later along the highway. At around the same time, my mother spotted my father, and he spotted her. Neither of them was shy, and both seemed willing to act on what they felt. My father joined the growing group. Justin Rohr became Justin Gilchrist when the group found him crying alongside the body of his dead mother. He was about 3 at the time, and he and Allie wound up coming together in another small family. Last came the 2 families of ex-slaves that joined together to become one growing family of sharers. There was Grayson Mora and his daughter Doe, and Emery Solis and her daughter Tori. That was it. 4 children, 4 men, and 5 women. They should have died. That they survived at all in the unforgiving world of the pox might qualify as a miracle, although of course Earthseed does not encourage belief in miracles. No doubt the group's isolated location, well away from towns and paved roads, helped keep it safe from much of the violence of the time. The land it settled on belonged to my father. There was on that land when the group arrived one dependable well, a half-ruined garden, a number of fruit and nut trees, and groves of oaks, pines, and redwoods. Once the members of the group had pooled their money and bought handcarts, seed, small livestock, hand tools, and other necessities, they were almost independent. They vanished into their hills and increased their numbers by birth, by adoptions of orphans, and by conversion of needy adults. They scavenged what they could from abandoned farms and settlements. They traded at street markets and traded with their neighbors. One of the most valuable things they traded with one another was knowledge. Every member of Earthseed learned to read and to write, and most knew at least 2 languages, usually Spanish and English, since those were the 2 most useful. Anyone who joined the group, child or adult, had to begin at once to learn these basics and to acquire a trade. Anyone who had a trade was always in the process of teaching it to someone else. My mother insisted on this, and it does seem sensible. Public schools had become rare in those days when 10-year-old children could be put to work. Education was no longer free, but it was still mandatory according to the law. The problem was, no one was enforcing such laws, just as no one was protecting child laborers. My father had the most valuable skills in the group. By the time he married my mother, he had been practicing medicine for almost 30 years. He was a multiple rarity for their location, well-educated, professional, and Black. Black people in particular were rare in the mountains. People wondered about him. Why was he there? He could have been making a better living in some small, established town. The area was littered with tiny towns that would be glad to have any doctor. Was he competent? Was he honest? Was he clean? Could he be trusted looking after wives and daughters? How could they be sure he was really a doctor at all? My father apparently wrote nothing at all about this, but my mother wrote about everything. She says at one point, Benkole heard the same whispers and rumors I did at the various street markets and in occasional meetings with neighbors, and he shrugged. He had us to keep healthy and our work-related injuries to treat. Other people had their first aid kits, their satellite phone nets, and if they were lucky, their cars or trucks. These vehicles tended to be old and undependable, but some people had them. Whether or not they called Benkole was their business. Then, thanks to someone else's misfortune, things improved. Jean Hawley's appendix flared up and all but ruptured, and the Hawley family, our eastern neighbors, decided that they had better take a chance on Benkole. Once Benkole had saved the woman's life, he had a talk with the family. He told them exactly what he thought of them for waiting so long to call him, for almost letting a woman with 5 young children die. He spoke with that intense, quiet courtesy of his that makes people squirm. The Hawleys took it. He became their doctor. And the Hawleys mentioned him to their friends, the Sullivans, and the Sullivans mentioned him to their daughter, who had married into the Gamma family, and the Gammas told the Dovetrees because old Mrs. Dovetree, the matriarch, had been a Gamma. That was when we began to get to know our nearest neighbors, the Dovetrees. Speaking of knowing people, I wish more than ever that I could have known my father. He seems to have been an impressive man, and perhaps it would have been good for me to know this version of my mother, struggling, focused, but very young, very human. I might have liked these people.
From the Journals of Lauren Oya Olamina. Monday, September 27th, 2032. I'm not sure how to talk about today. It was intended to be a quiet day of salvaging and plant collecting after yesterday's uncomfortable gathering and determined anniversary celebration. We have, it seems, a few people who think Jarrett may be just what the country needs, apart from his religious nonsense. The thing is, you can't separate Jarrett from the religious nonsense. You take Jarrett and you get beatings, burnings, tarrings, and featherings. They're a package. And there may be even nastier things in that package. Jarrett's supporters are more than a little seduced by Jarrett's talk of making America great again. He seems to be unhappy with certain other countries. We could wind up in a war, nothing like a war to rally people around flag, country, and a great leader. Nevertheless, some of our people, the Peralta and Faircloth families in particular, might be leaving us soon. I've got 4 kids left alive, Ramiro Peralta said yesterday at gathering. Maybe with a strong leader like Jarrett running things, they'll have a chance to stay alive. He's a good guy, Ramiro, but he's desperate for solutions, for order and stability. I understand that. He used to have 7 kids and a wife. He'd lost 3 of his kids and his wife to a fire set by an angry, frightened, ignorant mob who decided to cure a nasty cholera epidemic down in Los Angeles by burning down the area of the city where they thought the epidemic had begun. I kept that in mind as I answered him. Think, Ramiro, I said. Jarrett doesn't have any answers. How will lynching people, burning their churches, and starting wars help your kids to live? Ramiro Peralta only turned away from me in anger. He and Alan Faircloth looked across the gathering room, the schoolroom, at one another. They're both afraid. They look at their children. Alan has 4 kids too. And they're afraid and ashamed of their fear, ashamed of their powerlessness. And they're tired. There are millions of people like them, people who are frightened and just plain tired of all the chaos. They want someone to do something, fix things now. Anyway, we had a stormy gathering and an uneasy anniversary celebration. Interesting that they fear Edward J. Smith's supposed incompetence more than they fear Jared's obvious tyranny. So, this morning, I was ready for a day of walking, thinking, and plant collecting with friends. We still travel in groups of 3 or 4 when we leave Acorn because the mountains, on the roads and off them, can be dangerous. But for nearly 5 months now, we've had no trouble while salvaging. I suppose, though, that can be dangerous in itself. Sad. Raids and gangs are dangerous because they kill outright. Peace is dangerous because it encourages complacency and carelessness, which also kills sooner or later. In spite of the Dovetree raid, we were, to be honest, more complacent than usual because we were heading for a place that we knew. It was a burned, abandoned farmhouse far from Dovetree where we'd spotted some useful plants. In particular, there was aloe vera for use in easing burns and insect bites, and there were big mounds of agave. The agave was a handsome variegated species, blue-green leaves edged in yellow-white. It must have been growing and propagating untended for years in what was once the front yard of the farmhouse. It was one of the large, vicious varieties of agave, each individual plant an upturned rosette of stiff, fibrous, fleshy leaves, some of them over 1 meter long in the big parent plants. Each leaf was tipped with a long, hard, dagger-sharp spike, and for good measure, each leaf was edged in jagged thorns that were tough enough to saw through human flesh. We intend to use them to do just that. On our first visit, we had taken some of the smallest plants, the youngest offsets. Now we meant to dig up as many of the rest as we could bundle into our handcart. The cart was already more than half full of things we had salvaged from the rotting storage shed of a collapsed cabin a couple of miles from where the agave grew. We had found dusty pots, pans, buckets, old books and magazines, rusted hand tools, nails, log chains, and wire. All had been damaged by water and time, but most could be cleaned and repaired or cannibalized for parts, or at least copied. We learn from all the work we do. We've become very competent makers and repairers of small tools. We've survived as well as we have because we keep learning. Our customers have come to know that if they buy from us, they'll get their money's worth. Salvaging from abandoned gardens and fields is useful too. We collect any herb, fruit, vegetable, or nut-producing plant, any plant at all that we know is supposed to be useful. We have always a special need for spiny, self-sufficient desert plants that will tolerate our climate. They serve as part of our thorn fence. Cactus by cactus, thorn bush by thorn bush, we've planted a living wall in the hills around Acorn. Our wall won't keep determined people out, of course. No wall will do that. Cars and trucks will get in if their owners are willing to absorb some damage to their vehicles. But cars and trucks that work are rare and precious in the mountains, and most fuels are expensive. Even intruders on foot can get in if they're willing to work at it. But the fence will hamper and annoy them. It will make them angry and perhaps noisy. It will, when it's working well, encourage people to approach us by the easiest routes, and those we guard 24 hours a day. It's always best to keep an eye on visitors. So, we intended to harvest agave. We headed for what was left of the farmhouse. It was built on a low rise overlooking fields and gardens. It was supposed to be our last stop before we went home. It came near to being our last stop, period. There was an old gray house truck parked near the ruin of the house. We didn't see the truck at first. It was hidden behind the larger of two chimneys that still stood like head and foot stones, commemorating the burned house. I mentioned to Jorge Cho the way the chimneys looked. Jorge was with us because, in spite of his youth, he's good at spotting useful salvage that other people might dismiss as junk. "What are head and foot stones?" he asked me. He meant it. He's 18, an escapee from the Los Angeles area like me, but his experience has been very different. While I was being cared for and educated by educated parents, he was on his own. He speaks Spanish and a little remembered Korean, but no English. He was 7 when his mother died of flu, and 12 when an earthquake killed his father. It collapsed the old brick building in which the family had been squatting. So at 12, Jorge alone was responsible for his younger sister and brother. He took care of them somehow and taught himself to read and write Spanish with occasional help from an old wino acquaintance. He worked at hard, dangerous, often illegal jobs. He salvaged, and when necessary, he stole. He and his sister and brother, 3 Korean kids in a poor neighborhood of Mexican and Central American refugees, managed to survive. But they had no time to learn non-essentials. Now we're teaching them to read, write, and speak English because that will enable them to communicate with more people. And we're teaching them history, farming, carpentry, and incidental things like what head and foot stones are. The other 2 members of the salvage team were Natividad Douglas and Michael Cardos. Jorge and I are sharers. Mike and Natividad aren't. It's too dangerous to send out a majority of sharers on any team. Sharers are too vulnerable. We suffer no matter who gets hurt. But 2 and 2 is a good team, and the 4 of us work well together. It's unusual for us all to be careless at the same time. But today, we managed it. The fireplace and chimney that had concealed the truck from us had been the end wall of what was once a large living room. The fireplace was big enough to roast a whole cow. The whole affair was just big enough to conceal a medium-sized house truck. We saw the thing only an instant before it opened fire on us. We were armed, as usual, with our automatic rifles and our sidearms, but against the armor and the firepower of even a modest house truck, those were nothing. We dropped to the ground under a spray of dirt and rock kicked up by bullets hitting the ground around us. We scrambled backward down the rise on which the house was built. The crest of the rise was our only cover. All we could do was lie at the foot of its slope and try to keep all of our body parts out of sight. We didn't dare stand or even sit up. There was nowhere for us to go. Bullets chewed the ground in front of us, then behind us, beyond the protection of the rise. There were no trees nearby, not even a large bush between us and the truck. We were in the thinnest part of the remains of a desert garden. We had not reached our agaves yet, could not reach them now. They couldn't have shielded us anyway. The only thing some of us might have at least concealed ourselves behind was a young, far from bulletproof young Washingtonia palm tree that we had passed on the way in. Its fronds were spread around it, low and green like a big bush. But it was at the north end of the house, and we were pinned down at the south end. The truck, too, was parked at the south end. The tree would have been no use to us. Nearest to us were a few aloe vera plants, a prickly pear, a small yucca, and a few weeds and tufts of grass. None of these would do us any good. If the people in the truck had been making full use of their equipment, even the rise would not have done us any good. We would already be dead. I wondered how they had managed to miss us when we arrived. Were they just trying to scare us off? I didn't think so. The shooting had gone on for too long. At last, it stopped. We lay still, playing dead, listening for the whine of a truck engine, for footsteps, for voices, for any of the sounds that might tell us we were being hunted or that our assailants had gone. There was only the low moan of the wind and the rustling of some of the plants. I lay thinking about the pine trees that I had seen on the high ridge far behind the house. I could see them in my mind's eye, and somehow it was all I could do to stop myself from raising my head to get a look at them, to see whether they were as far away as I thought they were. The weed-strewn fields of what had been the farm swept back and up into the hills. Above them were the pines that could shelter and conceal, but they were far beyond our reach. I sighed. Then we heard the sound of a child crying. We all heard it. A few short sobs, then nothing. The child sounded very young, not a baby, but young, exhausted, helpless, hopeless. The four of us looked at one another. We all care about kids. Michael has 2 and Natividad has 3. Bancole and I have been trying to have 1. Jorge, I'm glad to say, hasn't made anyone pregnant yet. But he's been a surrogate father to his younger sister and brother for 6 years. He knows as well as the rest of us do what dangers lie in wait for unprotected children. I raised my head just enough to get a quick look at the truck and the area around it. A house truck, armed, armored, and locked up tight, couldn't let the sound of a child's crying escape. And the sound had seemed normal, not amplified or modified by truck speakers. Therefore, one of the truck's doors must be open, wide open. I couldn't see much through the weeds and grasses. I didn't dare raise my head above them. All I could make out were the sunlit shapes of the chimney, the truck beside it, the weeds in the fields behind both chimney and truck, the distant trees, and movement? Movement, far away in the weeds of the field, but coming closer. Natividad pulled me down. "What is the matter with you?" she whispered in Spanish. For Jorge's sake, it was best to stay with Spanish while we were in trouble. "There are crazy people in that truck. Do you want to die?" "Someone else is coming," I said. "More than one person coming through the fields." "I don't care. Stay down." Natividad is one of my best friends, but sometimes having her along is like having your mother with you. "Maybe the crying is intended to lure us out," Michael said. "People have used children as lures before." He's a suspicious man, Michael is. He questions everything. He and his family have been with us for 2 years now, and I think it took him 6 months to accept us and to decide that we had no evil intentions towards his wife or his twin girls. This, even though we took them in and helped them when we found his wife alone, giving birth to the twins in a ruin of a shack where they had been squatting. The place was near a stream, so they had water, and they had a couple of scavenged pots, but they were armed only with an ancient, empty .22 caliber target pistol and a knife. They were all but starving, eating pine nuts, wild plants, and an occasional small animal that Michael trapped or killed with a rock. In fact, he was away looking for food when his wife Noriko went into labor. Michael agreed to join us because he was terrified that in spite of his odd jobs, begging, stealing, and scavenging, his wife and babies might starve. We never asked more of them than that they do their share of the work to keep the community going, and that they respect Earthseed by not preaching other belief systems. But to Michael, this sounded like altruism, and Michael didn't believe in altruism. He kept expecting to catch us selling people into slavery or prostituting them. He didn't begin to relax until he realized that we were, in fact, practicing what we preached. Earthseed was and is the key to us. We had a way of life that he thought was sensible, and a goal, a destiny, that he thought was crazy. But we weren't up to anything that would harm his family. And his family was the key to him. Once he accepted us, he and Noriko and the girls settled in and made Acorn very much their home. They're good people. Even Michael's suspiciousness can be a good thing. Most of the time, it helps us keep alert. I don't think the crying was intended to lure us out, I said. But something is wrong here, that's obvious. The people in that truck should either make sure we're dead or they should leave. And we shouldn't hear them, Jorge said. No matter how loud that kid yells, we shouldn't hear a thing. Natividad spoke up. Their gun shouldn't have missed us, she said. In a truck like that, the gun should be run by a computer. Automatic targeting. The only way you can miss is if you insist on doing things yourself. You might forget to put your guns on the computer, or you might leave the computer off if you just wanted to scare people. But if you're serious, you shouldn't keep missing. Her father had taught her more about guns than most of our community knew. I don't think they missed us on purpose, I said. It didn't feel like that. I agree, Michael said. So what's wrong over there? Shit, Jorge whispered. What's wrong is the bastards are going to kill us if we move. The guns went off again. I pressed myself against the ground and lay there frozen, eyes shut. The idiots in the truck meant to kill us whether we moved or not, and their chances for success were excellent. Then I realized that this time, they weren't shooting at us. Someone screamed. Over the steady clatter of one of the truck's guns, I heard someone scream in agony. I didn't move. When someone was in pain, the only way I could avoid sharing the suffering was not to look. Jorge, who should have known better, raised his head and looked. An instant later, he doubled up, thrashing and twisting in someone else's agony. He didn't scream. Sharers who survive learn early to take the pain and keep quiet. We keep our vulnerability as secret as we can. Sometimes we manage not to move or give any sign at all. But Jorge hurt too much to keep his body still. He clutched himself, crossing his arms over his belly. At once I felt a dull echo of his pain in my own middle. It is incomprehensible to me that some people think of sharing as an ability or a power, as something desirable. Fool, I said to Jorge, and held him until the pain passed from both of us. I concealed my own pain as best I could so that we wouldn't develop the kind of nasty feedback loop that I've learned we sharers are capable of. We don't die of the pains that we see and share. We wish we could sometimes. And there is danger in sharing too much pain or too many deaths. These are individual matters. 5 years ago, I shared 3 or 4 deaths fast, one after another. It hurt more than anything should be able to hurt. Then it knocked me out. When I came to, I was numb and sick and dazed long after there was any pain to share. With lesser pains, it's enough to turn away. In minutes, the pain is over for us. Deaths take much longer to get over. The one good thing about sharing pain is that it makes us very slow to cause pain to other people. We hate pain more than most people do. I'm okay, Jorge said after a while. And then, those guys out there, I think they're dead. They must be dead. They're down anyway, Michael whispered as he looked where Jorge had looked. I can see at least 3 of them in the field beyond the chimney and the truck. He squirmed backward so that he could relax and no longer see or be seen over the rise. Sometimes I try to imagine what it must be like to look at pain and feel nothing. My current recurring nightmare is the closest I've come to that kind of freedom. Not that it felt like freedom, but to Michael, feeling nothing must be, well, normal. Everything had gone quiet. The truck had not moved. It did nothing. They seemed to need a moving target, I said. Maybe they're high on something, Natividad said. Or maybe they're just crazy. Jorge, are you sure you're okay? Yes, I just want to get the hell out of here. I shook my head. We're stuck here, at least until it gets dark. If the truck has even the cheapest night vision equipment, the dark won't help us, Michael said. I thought about that, then nodded. Yes, but it shot at us and missed, and it hasn't moved even though 2 sets of people have found its hiding place. I'd say either the truck or the people in it are not in good working order. We'll stay here until dark, then we'll run. If we're lucky, no one will wander in behind us before then and give us trouble or draw the truck's attention back this way. But whatever happens, we'll wait. 3 people are dead, Michael said. We should be dead ourselves. Maybe before the night is over, we will be. I sighed. Shut up, Mike. We waited through the cool autumn day. We were lucky that 2 days before the weather had turned cool. We were also lucky that it wasn't raining. Perfect weather for getting pinned down by armed lunatics. The truck never moved. No one else came along to trouble us or to draw fire. We ate the food we had brought along for lunch and drank what was left of our water. We decided that the truckers must think we were dead. Well, we were content to play dead until the sun had set. We waited. Then we moved. In the dark, we began to crawl toward the northward edge of our cover. Moving this way, we hoped to put so much of the big chimney between ourselves and the truck that the people in the truck would not have time to see us and open fire before we got to better cover behind the second chimney. Once we reached the second chimney, we hoped to keep both chimneys between ourselves and the immobile truck as we escaped. That was fine as long as the truck remained immobile. If it moved, we were dead. Even if it didn't move, there would be a moment when we were easy targets, when we had to run across open ground. Oh God, oh God, oh God, Jorge whispered through clenched teeth as he stared at the stretch of open ground. If the truck managed to shoot anyone and he saw it, he would collapse. So would I. Don't look around, I reminded him. If you hear shots, look straight ahead and run. But before we could start, the crying began again. There was no mistaking the sound. It was the open, uninhibited sobbing of a child, and this time, it didn't stop. We ran. The sound of the crying might help to cover any sounds we made over the uneven ground, although we weren't noisy. We've learned not to be. Jorge reached the smaller chimney first. I was next. Then Michael and Natividad arrived together. Michael is short and lean, and looks as quick as he is. Natividad is stocky and strong, and doesn't look quick at all. But she tends to surprise people. We all made it. There were no shots fired. And in the time it took us to reach the smaller chimney, I found that I had changed my mind about things. The crying had not stopped or even paused. When I looked around the small chimney toward the truck, I could see light, a broad swatch of dim blue-gray light. I couldn't see people, but it was clear that we had guessed right. A side door of the truck was wide open. We were all bunched together at the smaller chimney, the others peering toward the down slope north of us. That was where they still expected to go. There was starlight enough to light the way, and I could see Jorge, bent down, his hands on his thighs, as though he were about to run a race. The child was not sobbing now, but wailing, a thin, exhausted sound. Best to move before the crying stopped. Also best to move before the others understood what I meant to do, what I now knew I had to do. They would follow me and back me up as long as I moved fast and didn't give them time to think or argue. Let's go, Michael said. I paid no attention. There was, I realized, a bad smell in the air, swelling and fading in the evening breeze. It seemed to be coming from the truck. Come on, Michael urged. No, I said, and waited until all three of them had turned to look at me. Timing now. I want to see about that child, I said, and I want that truck. I moved then, just ahead of their restraining hands and words. I ran. I ran around the carcass of the house, shifting for an instant from reality into my dream. I was running past the stark ruin of a house, its chimneys, its few remaining black bones just visible against the stars. Just for an instant, I thought I saw shadowy dream forms, shadows rising, moving. I shook off the feeling and stopped as I reached the larger chimney. I edged around it, willing the truckers not to shoot me, terrified that they would shoot me, moving fast in spite of the terror. The blue-gray light was brighter now, and the smell had become a sickening stench of rottenness that I found all too familiar. I crouched low, hoping to be out of sight of the truck's cameras, and I crossed in front of the truck, near enough to put out my hand and touch it. Then I reached the far side of where the light was, where the door must be open. As I went, I almost fell over the crying child. It was a little girl of perhaps 6 or 7. She was filthy beyond my ability to describe filthiness. She sat in the dirt, crying, reaching up to wipe away tears and rearrange some of the mud on her face. She looked up and saw me just as I managed to stop myself from falling over her. She stared at me, her mouth open, as I swung past her to level my rifle into the blue-gray light of the truck's interior. I don't know what I expected to see. Drunken people sprawled about, an orgy, more filth, people aiming their weapons at me. Death? There was death nearby. I knew that. The smell was unmistakable. What I did see in the blue-gray light was another child, another little girl, asleep at one of the truck's monitors. She had put her head down against the edge of the control board and was snoring a little. The blue-gray light came from the 3 screens that were on. All 3 showed only gray, grainy electronic snow. There were also 3 dead people in the truck. That is, I thought they must be dead. It was clear that all had been wounded, shot, I thought, several times. In fact, they must have been shot some time ago, days ago perhaps. The blood on their bodies had dried and darkened. I don't share any feelings with the unconscious or the dead, I'm glad to say. No matter how they look or smell, they don't bother me that much. I've seen too many of them. I climbed into the truck, leaving the crying child outside to the care of the others. I could already hear Natividad talking to her. Natividad loves kids, and they seem to trust her as soon as they meet her. Jorge and Michael had come up behind me as I climbed into the truck. Both froze as they saw the sleeping child and the sprawled bodies. Then Michael moved past me to check the bodies. He, Natividad, Ali Gilchrist, and Zara Balter have learned to assist Bancole. They have no official medical or nursing training, but Bancole has trained them, is training them, and they're careful and serious about their work. Michael checked the bodies and discovered that only one, a slender, dark, middle-aged man, was dead. He had been shot in the chest and abdomen. The other 2 were a big, naked, middle-aged blonde woman, shot in the legs and thighs, and a clothed blonde boy of about 15, shot in the legs and left shoulder. These people were covered with dried blood. Nevertheless, Michael found faint heartbeats in the woman and the boy. "We've got to get them to Bancole," he said. "This is too much for me." "Oh, shit," Jorge moaned. and he ran outside and threw up. I couldn't blame him. He had just noticed me into their pain if they were conscious. Keeping my back to Michael and his patients, I awoke the sleeping child. She wasn't quite as filthy as the little girl we'd found outside, but she did need a bath. She squinted up at me, groggy, uncomprehending. Then she gave a little squeal and tried to dart past me and out the door. I caught her and held her while she struggled and screamed. I spoke to her, whispered to her, tried to reassure her, did all I could to bring her out of her hysteria. It's all right, honey, it's all right. Don't cry. You'll be all right. We'll take care of you. Don't worry. We'll take care of you. I rocked her and crooned to her as though to a much younger child. The dead and wounded were no doubt her family. She and the other child had been alone here with them for how long? They would need all the care we could give them. After much more screaming and struggling, she began to take refuge in my arms, holding on to me instead of trying to escape. From my arms, she stared, huge-eyed, at the others. Jorge stood watch at the monitors once his stomach settled. Natividad had calmed the other little girl and found a clean cloth and some water. These she used to wash the child's face, hands, and arms. Michael had left the wounded woman and boy to examine the truck's controls. Of the four of us, he was the only one who knew how to drive. Any trouble? I asked him. He shook his head. Not even any sign of booby traps. I guess they would have worried about the kids springing them. Can you drive it? No problem. Drive it then. It's ours. Let's go home. The truck was all right. There was plenty of power in its batteries, and Michael had no trouble finding and using its night vision equipment. It carried infrared, ambient light, and radar devices. All of these were of good quality and all worked. The little girls must not have understood how to use them, as they had not known how to drive. Or perhaps they had known how to operate everything, but had not known where to go with it. Who could little children go to for help after all? If they had no adult relatives, even the police would either sell them illegally or indenture them legally. Indenturing indigents, young and old, is much in fashion now. The 13th and 14th Amendments, the ones abolishing slavery and guaranteeing citizenship rights, still exist, but they've been so weakened by custom, by Congress and the various state legislatures, and by recent Supreme Court decisions that they don't much matter. Indenturing indigents is supposed to keep them employed, teach them a trade, feed them, house them, and keep them out of trouble. In fact, it's just one more way of getting people to work for nothing, or almost nothing. Little girls are valued because they can be used in so many ways, and they can be coerced into being quick, docile, disposable labor. No doubt these two girls have been taught to be terrified of strangers. Then, with their parents and brother out of action, they had been left on their own to defend their family and their home. In their blind fear, they must have, shot at us, and shot and hit three men who gave no sign of being anything worse than wanderers, perhaps salvagers. Michael and Natividad did go out to check on these men before we left, while Jorge and I loaded our handcart and its contents onto the truck. The three men were dead. They had hard currency and holstered guns, which Michael and Natividad collected. We covered them with rocks and left them. But they had been even less of a danger to the house truck than we were. If they had walked right up to the truck, a locked door would have kept them out. Their old 9mm semi-automatics would have had no chance against the truck's armor. But the little girls hadn't realized that. We got them home to Acorn, and they're getting baths, food, comfort, and rest. Bancole is working on their mother and brother. He was not happy to have new patients, Our clinic has never been so full, and he has all his students and some volunteers helping him. He says he doesn't know whether he'll be able to save this new mother and son. He has a few simple instruments and an intricate little diagnostic unit that he saved when he fled his home in San Diego 5 years ago. And he has a few medicines, drugs to ease pain, fight infection, and otherwise keep us healthy. If the boy lives, Bankole doesn't know whether he'll walk again. Bankole will do his best for them. And Allie Gilchrist and May are taking care of the little girls. The girls have been lucky, at least, in having us find them. They'll be safe with us. And now, at last, we have something we've needed for years. We have a truck. Wednesday, September 29th, 2032. With all the work that my Bankole has had to do to help the wounded woman and boy and the wounded dove trees, he didn't get around to shouting at me over the truck incident until last night. And, of course, he didn't shout. He tends not to. It's a pity. His disapproval might be easier to take if it were quick and loud. It was, as usual, quiet and intense. It's a shame that so many of your unnecessary risks pay off so well, he said to me as we lay in bed last night. You're a fool, you know. It's as though you think you can't be killed. My God, girl, you're old enough to know better. I wanted the house truck, I said. And I realized we might be able to get it, and we might be able to help a child. We kept hearing one of them crying. He turned his head to look at me for several seconds, his mouth set. You've seen children led down the road in convict collars or chains, he said. You've seen them displayed as enticements before houses of prostitution. Are you going to tell me you did this because you heard one crying? I do what I can, I said. When I can do more, I will. You know that. He just looked at me. If I didn't love him, I might not like him so much at times like these. I took his hand and kissed it and held it. I do what I can, I repeated. And I wanted the house truck. Enough to risk not only yourself, but your whole team, 4 people. The risk in running away empty-handed was at least as great as the risk of going for the truck. He made a sound of disgust and withdrew his hand. So now you've got a battered old house truck, he muttered. I nodded. So now we have it. We need it. You know we do. It's beginning. It's not worth anyone's life. It didn't cost any of our lives. I sat up and looked at him. I needed to have him see me as well as he could in the dim light from the window. I wanted to have him know that I meant what I was saying. If I had to die, I said, if I had to get shot by strangers, shouldn't it be while I was trying to help the community and not just while I was trying to run away? He raised his hands and gave me an ironic round of applause. I knew you would say something like that. Well, I never thought you were stupid. Obsessed, perhaps, but not stupid. That being the case, I have a proposition for you. He sat up, and I moved close to him and pulled the blankets up around us. I leaned against him and sat, waiting. Whatever he had to say, I felt that I'd gotten my point across. If he wanted to call my thinking obsessive, I didn't care. I've been looking at some of the towns in the area, he said. Saylorville, Halstead, Coy, towns that are a few miles off the highway. None of them need a doctor now, but one probably will someday soon. How do you feel about living in one of those towns? I sat still, surprised. He meant it. Saylorville, Halstead, Coy? These are communities so small that I'm not sure they qualify as towns. Each has no more than a few families and businesses huddled together between the highway. US 101, and the sea. We trade at their street markets, but they're closed societies, these towns. They tolerate foreign visitors, but they don't like us. They've been burned too many times by strangers passing through, people who turned out to be thieves or worse. They trust only their own and long established neighboring farmers. Did Bankole think they would welcome us? Except for a larger town called Prada, the nearest towns are almost all white. Prada is white and Latino with a sprinkling of Asians. We're, you name it, black, white, Latino, Asian, and any mixture at all. The kind of thing you'd expect to find in a city. The kids we've adopted and the ones who've been born to us think of all the mixing and matching as normal. Imagine that. Bankole and I, both black, have managed to mix things up age-wise. He's always being mistaken for my father. When he corrects people, they wink at him, or frown, or grin. Here in Acorn, if people don't understand us, at least they accept us. I'm content here, I said. The land is yours. The community is ours. With our work and with Earthseed to guide us, we're building something good here. It will grow and spread. We'll see that it does. But for now, nothing in any of those towns is ours. It can be, he said. You don't realize how valuable a physician is in an isolated community. Oh, don't I? I know how valuable you are to us. He turned his head toward me. More valuable than a truck? Idiot, I said. You want to hear praise? Fine. Consider yourself praised. You know how many of our lives you've saved, including mine? He seemed to think about that for a moment. This is a healthy, young group of people, he said, except for the Dovetree woman. Even your most recent adoptees are healthy people who've been injured, not sick people. We have no old people, he grinned, except me. No chronic problems except for Katrina Dovetree's heart. Not even a problem pregnancy or a child with worms. Almost any town in the area needs a doctor more than Acorn does. They need any doctor. We need you. Besides, they have what they need. As I've said, they won't always. I don't care. I moved against him. You belong here. Don't even think about going away. Thinking is all I can do about it right now. I'm thinking about a safe place for us, a safe place for you when I'm dead. I winced. I'm an old man, girl. I don't kid myself about that. Bankole, I have to think about it. I want you to think about it too. Do that for me. Just think about it.
Okay. I've paused it. That is the end of chapter 2. We've done the prologue all the way up to chapter 2. That's 40 pages. And let's see how many pages are left. So many. Like 300 pages. Oh, there's a reading group guide in here already. Wow. A Conversation with Octavia Butler is the reading group guide. What were your motivations for taking your title from the biblical Parable of Talents? Why have you described Parable of Talents as a novel of solutions? Oh, so this is just an interview with Octavia Butler. Okay, reading group questions and topics for discussion. Considering the comfort and security that Acorn provides, and considering that his lifelong sister has found him and saved him from a life of bondage. Why do you think Marcus rejects Earthseed? Okay, I don't think we've gotten there yet. I don't even know who Marcus is. I don't think I've been introduced to Marcus yet. Okay, so let me pull up this one study guide that I have. Well, not study guide, but let's see. Okay. Oh, okay. So these discussing questions were pulled from the back of the book. Okay, so it seems like we don't have enough context yet for some of these questions. This one says, considering the following quote from Parable of the Sower. Oh, do they? Okay. The destiny of Earthseed is to take root among the stars. That's the ultimate Earthseed aim and the ultimate human change. Short of death, it's a destiny we'd better pursue if we hope to do anything other than smooth-skinned dinosaurs here today, gone tomorrow. Do you believe that humans should try to achieve space travel? Do you think we should try to build homes on other planets? Okay. So I'll just go over some of the notes that I have, because it seems like we'll have to go through a significant portion of the book to be able to really answer some questions that are given. So from the very beginning, the book is bringing up like purpose versus potential, which I think is interesting. I wonder how my beliefs on purpose and potential will change over time. And I thought this was also interesting. I'm still in the prologue. And it says, the quote is, and she needed large events to manipulate. All gods seem to need these things. I found that very compelling because, the book then goes on to talk about the pops. And I think like large events like pandemics, genocides, climate change, whatever is like traumatic for a mass group of people and just witnessing a lot of suffer, you're very vulnerable to be manipulated. And I don't know if the word manipulate, I can Google it. Like, I don't know if the word manipulate is always negative, or do some people see manipulate as like a means to an end? Or can manipulate just be a neutral word? Okay, I just typed that in. Okay, so manipulate just seems like for the first definition, operate, handle, work, control, and then second is a negative, control or influence a person or situation cleverly, unfairly, or unscrupulously. Okay, that's fair. The next part I thought is interesting is God is change. It just reminded me of how like when people, I've learned to see the ways that people have viewed God as like God exists because certain things happen, like change. Every time you're witnessing change, you're witnessing God. I find that to be interesting. And it seems like, I don't know if this was the very beginning of like this whole parable of talents things coming up, and how in this Lauren part where it seems like the daughter was talking to us about Lauren Olamina, and she said she had a habit during her youth of hiding caches of food, money, and weaponry in and out of the way of places or with trusted people. That seems like a very beginning of like discussing the parable of talents. Like the gist of that. parable. Also, I didn't put a link to join the screen, but if anybody wants to join the screen to chat about what we've read, let me know in the comments. But in the next live, I'll put the link to join in the description. Okay. So on page 4, it was very relevant how it was discussed how the pox was exasperating current issues, the similar ways that the pandemic has. And I also made a note of when it said how the United States of America suffered a major non-military defeat. It lost no important war, yet it did not survive the pox. Perhaps it simply lost sight of what it once intended to be, then blundered aimlessly until it exhausted itself. So I made a note here just for like in real life, I think there is an aim. Like, I think the United States is a very clear aim, but a lot of us can constantly doubt whether we know or we feel like that aim is true. And the aim, I think, is like imperialism, fascism, like just exploiting workers. I think that's the aim. And whether or not this aim will bite other elites in the butt or whatever, that's one thing. But I don't know. I think they're going to be, I think if anything, the elites are fighting to not be caught up in the sufferings of capitalism or the impacts, the negative impacts or this impact. Sorry, my nose. Okay. I find it interesting in the parable of the sower, there was also a couple with an age gap. You have Lauren being 18 and what's that man's name? The doctor, Bankole. Or are these the same people from the parable of the sower? I can't remember. And then we get introduced to the hyper empathy people. I'm guessing these are supposed to be like a spiritual group of people. I don't know how to envision these people. I don't know how to envision them as like fully human, or are they like X-Men kind of like not fully human or something. And then I was just taking note in the book about all the characteristics of the hyper empathy people, aka sharers. And I found it interesting that it was like this hyper empathy can come from if you're born from someone addicted to the paracetamol. I don't know if that was like, that's what I picked up, but I don't know if that's true. And so one thing that even like in my brief introduction to the parable of the talents, I was like, oh, like again, when I learned about settler colonialism, that's when I started to understand like why people say certain things about how they decide to live their life and what values we are constantly taught in the United States and in Western culture. So this book is now showing me, oh, like now I'm seeing why I'm starting to understand certain United States based values that stem from Christianity. Because a lot of people talk about like how our values come from Christianity. But unless you really are like sitting here and like reading the Bible or like, you know, you really don't understand it. And people don't always say, oh, I invest in the stock market or I gamble when I'm given certain resources to double it and triple it is because the parable of the talents. Like people don't just say that. And if they do, it goes right over my head. So on page 10, when we're reading a chapter of Lauren's dream, she says, my father loved parables, stories that taught, stories that presented ideas and morals in ways that made pictures in people's minds. Because that's the thing, it's like we're constantly accepting certain morals that are given to us, and they just become like basic foundation to where people believe these things to be so true unless they are exposed to other things like successful ways of life. People believe these morals are true because they're like, oh, this is the only thing I see work when people fully believe in these things. So yeah, it just really made me think of gambling, the way that the person, the servant who decided to bury their talent and like hide it and keep it safe was seen as a failure and judged harsh by the Lord. This is already like starting off with the Lord, and not this book, but like my introduction to how like some people perceive the Lord as someone who will be upset with you, who you should be worried about how they will reprimand you or speak to you based on your actions. Someone who's not necessarily, it's like, it almost reminds me of like when like people go through trauma and they're like, well, God wanted me to go through this. And it's like, well, why would God put you through that? Like, why do you think, why does your God put you through that suffering? It kind of reminds me of those things that I've heard. So that was interesting to me, because now people are like, well, it's really this incentive of like, or people thinking like, okay, so somebody gave you some money and you just put it under your mattress. Why didn't you put it in a savings account? Like that's kind of what, like a savings account that's gonna like give you interest. That's kind of what it reminds me of, like this idea that you are foolish for, not constantly trying to grow your money. And then the way our money grows currently in the United States is through a whole bunch of like nefarious ways to make sure that people reap the benefits of interest. Let's see. So around page 15, we are introduced to a lot. I highlighted the cultist thing because I found that to be interesting, where it was talking about the cultist is a great catch-all term for anyone who fits into no other large category and yet doesn't quite match Jared's version of Christianity. And I think that can be said today. Like any group of people who isn't fitting into another group of people's way of thinking, they call that other group a cult, when in fact that group might also be called a cult. I find that very, very interesting. I think it makes me re-examine the word cult. It's one of those words that like, it's hard to give it a strict definition. Like that's why I want to read more into cults, because I'm like, you have so many kinds of cults, and how can you clearly say something isn't a cult when you have a lot of people or just a group of people practicing a certain belief with rituals? Okay. And then we get the whole "Make America Great Again" quote, which is very interesting because, of course, this book was written way before Trump's presidency even came to be. And I feel like now, after Trump's presidency is over and who knows can start again, it's just interesting how like people will use something like this that is like extremely eerie to kind of just further legitimize the negatives of one party or one group of people. So because this is said the way it is, it's like, yeah, like, I think it further makes Trump look worse than just like just as bad as anyone else, a lot of other people in the two-party system that's not, Trump or whatever. So I'm thinking like certain Democrats and whatnot. So for me, this feels like if people are reading this book, like, oh my goodness, like this is why like Trump is so bad. I feel like it should be read as like, oh my gosh, this is why Trump is so bad, and this is why like everything is so bad, rather than like proving one side. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I think I can further explain it with other things that I've highlighted. I found the rumors part on the next page to be really interesting. I feel like rumors are a part of life, the same way as I think like public education depreciating is like a part of life. Like it's something that we just have to deal with rather than it changing in a timely manner. I think it's just something that is a truth of the world we live in for a foreseeable future. Because rumors suck. Anybody can just create a rumor about someone, and that is very like nerve-wracking. Someone can wake up one day and just write a compelling rumor, and it will spread. And you can never completely scrub that rumor from people's minds. My grandma just called me. Okay. So, and yeah, then we get some more specifics about Lauren talking about her talents and it being Earthseed. Although I haven't buried it in the ground, I have buried it here in these coastal mountains where it can grow at about the same speed as our redwood trees. And then she goes on to say, if I had somehow been as good at rebel rousing as Jared is, then Earth Seed might be a big enough movement by now to be a real target. And would that be better? I feel like this is like foreshadowing, because I think that's a red flag. I think it's kind of like a red flag when you kind of want your group to be as strategic as the harmful group. I don't think, especially like as like Democrats, when people are like, oh, like the Democrats just don't have good messaging and organizing the same way as Republicans. I'm just like, and if they did, would that be any better though? Because it's like, is it good to be striving to have this kind of overarching message to a lot of people? You know, and you might think it's for the greater good, but is it? You know? So yeah, I'll stop there. So let's see. Oh, I found this interesting. So as the book is going on, I'm starting to feel like the ways that people organize is seeming a little like biblical, and it's seeming like I don't know how to describe it. It's like on the beginning of chapter 2 when it talks about the original settlers of Acorn, and thus the 13 original members of Earthseed. It sounds like very culty. It sounds kind of culty, or it sounds kind of, yeah. And it just reminded me like similar of like the Black Panther Party, of like these people that get together and like and it's saying, because my mother's first highway converts, people are converts. And you know, they were vulnerable and all this stuff. And that, you know, they trekked, you know, north where they hoped to find better lives. It just all seemed a little like you never like, until someone gives you a perspective about how what you're doing looks, you don't believe it. Like, for example, I remember in college, I heard this story, and then when I was younger, I heard this story, but like, it's a story of when you flip the word America backwards and they pronounce it and they call it like this mysterious group of people. And they go on to talk about like how Americans live their life, but they, you know, put some twist in it to make it not sound on the nose. And everybody hears the story and they're like, oh, those people are so weird and different. And it's just this, it's not weird, different people. It's you, but your actions were just told in a slightly different way. And you find it so weird. And so that's kind of why I'm like a little shaken up by that. Cause I'm like, do I never want to fall into what is being described here? Like, why am I feeling adverse to what's being described? Oh, something I thought also was really interesting about was the questions for why Bicole. I'm so bad. Benkole. When Benkole is just this Black doctor in this neighborhood when he could be other places, I find that to be really important. I do think it's important. If someone is out of place, ask some questions, wonder things. Because why are you here when you could be somewhere else? Like, what really is the motive here? And the questions were like, was he competent? Was he honest? Was he clean? Could he be trusted after wives and daughters? How could they be sure he was really a doctor at all? I think these are very important questions, like when you don't know someone like that we might take for granted. So I just thought that was good. Oh, so here's where I'm kind of going back to with the whole Make America Great Again quote and how that's looked at as like something really bad about what's going on today. But at the same time, I think it's really important to when Lauren in her journal is questioning Jarrett, like talking about you can't separate Jarrett from the religious nonsense. You can take Jarrett and you get beatings, burnings, tarrings, and featherings. They're a package. And I find that to be interesting to even be caring about in 2020, in 2032, being like, oh, this candidate is horrible. Why is that even being discussed in this amount of chaos and like violence? Like, do you really think like a different candidate would make any of this that you're dealing with better? And even if this candidate will make things worse, things are already bad. Like, what other things could we be talking about other than like someone obviously bad? So that was kind of what it's reminding me of and connecting it to this day. Like, is this conversation worth discussing? Saying he could wind up in a war, nothing like a war to rally people around a flag in a country and great leader. And I'm just like, it feels like certain things are already happening. It's almost like, is a war not kind of going on right now in the life that's being described? Like, so I find that like positioning interesting. And then on the next page, I noticed how desperation breeds many responses, because it goes to talk about how like Ramiro supports Jarrett. And I'm just like, yeah, desperation can really make people find hope in just random things. I don't think it's always like a solid reason. It could be whatever someone latches onto. I noted how like when they talked about discovering like cabins with resources, I always think of life like that. Like I always think like if things get much worse and something really bad happens and it turns out a lot of people's homes are abandoned, I always think of it as like The Walking Dead, where you're just wandering the streets and you find a home with a bunch of resources, and it was like a wealthy or a to-do family that lived there, and now you get to inhabit a house that you would have never been able to before and just play around in it. I always daydream about that. But I mean, I'll stop there. I have a bunch of little other things that I've noted, but I thought a lot of this was interesting. And I'm excited to go through more because those questions that I see in the back of the book seem really, 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 really good to talk about. But it seems like you got to get through a lot more of the book. So we'll be actually here for a couple weeks because we're only on page 40 and there's literally like 300 more pages to go. Yep. Literally 306 pages or something. No, 366 pages to go. So I will be back next week and I'll have a link just in case people want to join.